So next up to introduce our speaker is my friend and colleague, Kate Kramer. Kate's been an instructor here in the earth science and geology for 4 years. Prior to working for MCC, she worked as an instructor in geology at the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh and also worked at the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. Her studies in geology have taken her from examining arsenic-contaminated groundwater in a small Wisconsin town to the glaciers of Antarctica. She enjoys traveling the national parks and offers a great course, I can say personally, here at MCC about the national parks. Thank you very much and enjoy your evening.
Thank you, Kim. Good evening. Tonight I'd like to introduce Jack Darin, Executive Director of the Illinois Sierra Club. The Sierra Club's mission is to explore, enjoy, and protect the wild places of the earth, to practice and promote the responsible use of the Earth's ecosystem and resources, to educate and enlist humanity to protect and restore the quality of the natural and human environment, and to use all lawful means to carry out these objectives. Jack is a graduate of the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. He has worked for the Sierra Club Illinois chapter since 1989 and has been the director since 1992. His position entails working with citizens, volunteers, public officials, business, and labor across Illinois to find and advocate for the solutions to environmental problems threatening our communities. He has worked on a wide variety of conservation and pollution issues with federal, state, and local agencies, as well as private sector stakeholders. Jack has worked cooperatively with a wide range of stakeholders to clean up pollution, protect natural areas for future generations, and promote smart energy policies across Illinois. As the director of the Sierra Club political efforts in Illinois, and as an individual, Jack has also worked to elect pro-environmental politicians to local, state, and federal office. His work has included campaign planning, message development and delivery, fundraising, and acting as an environmental and strategic advisor to many candidates. He volunteers as the vice president of the Ridgefield Park District in Evanston, Illinois. Tonight, Jack will discuss fracking, a violent process that dislodges gas deposits from shale rock formations. It is known to contaminate drinking water, pollute the air, and cause micro-earthquakes. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to introduce Jack Darin.
All right, I think I'm on here. Thank you, Kate, for that introduction. Very nice. It's great to be here in McHenry County. I've been here all day, and I really enjoyed my day here at the college. We spoke to a couple of classes. We met with a great student group, Down to Earth, some of the leaders in the community, and great to hear, as always, about all the things you're doing, not only on energy policy, but conservation and solid waste and local food and water quality issues. I think that McHenry County continues to be a laboratory for the kind of solutions that, as a statewide policy advocate, we really need to learn from. There are a lot of people in Illinois facing similar problems to McHenry County, and you're really ahead of the curve on a lot of them. So thank you for everything that you're doing here at the college and in the community. I do work for the Sierra Club, Illinois chapter. If you don't know who the Sierra Club is, very briefly, we are a national environmental organization that was founded in 1892 by the naturalist John Muir, who actually was born in Scotland, came over to this country, and they have a great tradition in Scotland of walking and sort of rambling the outdoors. And so he thought that was a great way to get to know America. Started in Wisconsin and learned this was a pretty big country. He walked down to the Gulf of Mexico, then back to Wisconsin, and still had appetite for more. Ended up in the Sierra Nevada mountain range, which is where the name Sierra Club comes from, and really enjoyed with other outdoor enthusiasts the mountains. It's where the club aspect of Sierra Club comes from. And what originally started as a recreational organization, as America was settling the West, quickly became a volunteer activist organization. They protected places like Yosemite National Park and some of the crown jewels of our national park system. And a little bit of history, because we try to keep some of those elements at the core of the Sierra Club still today. We are a club of volunteers. Everyone's welcome to join. We have a very small staff. We really are primarily led by our volunteers, who really are bound The only thing that they really have in common is their concern for the environment, their love of the outdoors, and their mutual interest in working to protect it together. And we also really try to keep that recreational component too. We know that protecting the environment is hard work. Sometimes it can be depressing. So it's really important for us to enjoy the outdoors together, whether it's on a hiking trail, on a bike, in a canoe, in a park. So having those experiences ourselves and helping people, particularly young people today, have those experiences where it's increasingly difficult for kids to find ways to be outside and develop that love for the outdoors is an important part of who we are. So as a volunteer organization, we have worked on virtually every environmental issue under the sun over the years, whether it's from clean water to protecting wild places, solid waste issues. But about 10, 12 years ago, faced with the overwhelming evidence of what greenhouse gas emissions are doing to our climate, the Sierra Club really realized that if we weren't able to make a difference in global warming, then all these other places that we've worked to protect, all these pollution problems that we've worked to solve, really those efforts were going to be in vain if we weren't able to at least avert the worst consequences of climate change. So since that time, we've really been working intensively on energy policy as really the main driver of greenhouse gas emissions in our economy. And here in Illinois, that has meant a lot of interesting work for us. We're one of the major coal states in the country. We have the most nuclear power plants. We're growing quickly a renewable energy industry. So we have a little bit of everything when it comes to energy. But the issue of fracking and natural gas is relatively new to us. It is new to us. And so we're looking at examples in other parts of the country of what's happening with this new method of getting natural gas with great concern and with great interest. And, you know, natural gas fracturing, and we're going to talk about a lot of our concerns with it here tonight, but we do have a little bit of a complicated view of natural gas because there are real benefits to our economy and, at least in the short term, to our environment from increased natural gas production. We've been working for a long time to try to move Illinois beyond coal-generated electricity towards renewables, and the increase in natural gas that has come from hydraulic fracturing has certainly helped in that effort. A lot of our dirtiest, oldest coal-fired power plants that were having very real health impacts on the people that live near them have closed because they can't compete with the cheap power that is fueled in part by the new supplies of natural gas. Natural gas burns. It is a fossil fuel. It does have air pollution associated with burning it, but it's less than coal. So there are some good things in addition to the at least temporary lowering effect it's having on electric prices. And I think it's important that we keep that in mind because as we walk through what some of the impacts of fracturing are in this new method of getting the gas, it's important for us to realize that there's a lot of interest in society in not the negative impacts, but some of the economic and the energy impacts that are coming from it. So I want to talk a little bit about, first of all, what exactly hydraulic fracturing is. Natural gas is located in shale deposits. Shale is a rock. That's what it looks like. It's kind of a porous rock. And conventionally, we've gotten natural gas out of large deposits that are pressurized in the earth. So if you could get a well down to them, the pressure would just force it up and we would just have gas come up. Well, recently, and this is where the gas deposits, shale formations are in the country, and you can see that we do have some opportunity for natural gas production in Illinois. There's a lot of significant production has been happening in the southern Great Plains, the northern Rockies, and in New York State, Pennsylvania, and Ohio in particular. So these are the places that we're looking to see what their experience has been with this method of getting gas out of the ground in terms of trying to expect what the implications for Illinois might be. Because we do have it here in Illinois, at least in the southern third of our state. The southeastern part is where there's a lot of anticipation and concern about what fracking will look like there. We also have seen some very speculative leasing and exploration for gas as far north as McLean County in the Bloomington-Normal area. the New Albany Shale is the particular formation that underlies part of Illinois. So how does fracturing work? These gas deposits are very deep within the earth. They are anywhere from 5,000 to 7,000 feet deep, so about at least a mile under the earth. And where instead of having basically a conventional straight well down to a pocket of gas to release it, this technique involves pressurizing primarily water, but also carrying with it sand to basically, under very high pressure, blow it into these sort of honeycomb rock formations to fracture them and release the gas that's trapped in a lot of air pockets in those formations. So with the water and the sand, there are also a lot of chemicals involved in the process. And the chemicals really aren't there to break up the rock formation. The chemicals are primarily there to keep the well flowing up and down. Because you can imagine a well that has a curve in it that's over a mile long is pretty difficult to keep entirely free and clear. So, what is it going to look like, and what is it starting to look like in Illinois when the gas industry comes to town and starts to begin exploring for natural gas? First of all, in this part of the country where we are mostly a private land state, unlike some western states, they have to work out agreements with the landowners. So there have been a lot of issues with essentially middlemen who come offering money to landowners for their mineral rights. A lot of these are fairly complicated legal agreements, and sometimes people are well equipped to deal with them, sometimes they're not. A lot of times people they think that they're going to have gas drilled under their property and they're not going to see a lot, but then they realize this is a fairly industrial operation that happens usually in a rural area, and a lot of people have been surprised by what happens and all the infrastructure that's needed to support a hydraulic fracturing well. Really does look like industrial activity. Now, in Illinois, you might think that if you control your own property rights, that you can sort of decide whether or not fracking happens around you or not. But our law allows for companies basically to compel landowners who are surrounded by neighbors who have sold their mineral rights to have their mineral rights sold to as well. Now, they can't make you let the company come onto your property to do the pad, but they can drill under your property and all around you. So a lot of the people are excited. The people are traveling around southeastern Illinois offering people money. Some people are really terrified that they're going to be forced into this landscape change against their will. Once the land is secured, it's cleared. We have a lot of road construction to bring in. There are going to be a lot of trucks associated not only with preparing the site, but operating the site. Most states have allowed for these open pits to store the water that comes back out the well in. The drilling rig itself has a fairly large drilling pad. You can see you've got to accommodate a lot of vehicles, some temporary buildings on the site. It's a pretty intensive operation. There's got to be a pipeline to get both water to the site and to get the gas out. Where the water comes from is a real concern, particularly in places where there's not abundant water supplies. And in Illinois, historically, we haven't worried too much about our water supply, but we now are worrying a lot about our water supply. In this region, we're really worried about the aquifer that provides us with drinking water. In the southeastern part of the state where these gas deposits are, they too have their own drinking water supply concerns. They're more reliant on surface water reservoirs, unlike the groundwater that we mostly drink here. And we really don't have a lot of good regulations in place at the state level to tell how much water anybody is able to take out of a given source. So given how much water a fracking operation needs, this is a real cause for concern. In addition to water, sand. So sand trucks coming on, and Illinois faces a little bit of a double jeopardy when it comes to fracking, because not only do we have the gas in our state in those counties in Illinois, but we also happen to be home to some of the best frack sand in the whole world. Now, I thought until relatively recently that sand was basically sand, but that's not true. Sand can be granular, it can be different sized, it can be round, and it turns out that the round grains of sand are ideal for putting in that water, pressurizing it, getting to go a mile down in the pipe, and do its business exploding that shale formation. Well, one of the most accessible places to get that grain of sand is in a sandstone formation that's called the St. Peter's Sandstone Formation, and it basically underlies the upper Midwest, including McHenry County and all of northern Illinois and Wisconsin, Minnesota, Missouri, and Iowa. So in places where we may not see the actual drilling for the gas, we could very well see a big increase in open pit sand mining to get one of the key inputs to the process. This is what one of these look like. There are not necessarily a lot of toxins associated with getting sand out of the earth. It basically is what it looks like. It's a big hole in the ground where they extract the sand. But there have been a lot of health concerns in places where they have a lot of frac sand mining about the fine silica dust, which can be very dangerous and unhealthy if you inhale it. A lot of this has come to a head with a major controversy we've had near Starved Rock State Park, one of our most important state parks, one of our most popular natural areas in the entire state of Illinois. A little over a year ago, a company came in with a proposal to open a large open pit sand mine right on the border of Starved Rock State Park. And if you haven't been to Starved Rock, its primary features are these gorgeous sandstone canyons that basically flow into the Illinois River. Well, this open pit sand mine, it adjoins the park. It's not in the park, but it would basically excavate the tops of one of those canyons, and the processed water from the mine would be discharged into a creek and flow down through the park into the Illinois River. So this has really touched a nerve with a lot of people, and our Department of Natural Resources has been kind of stymied. They own the state park. Their job is to protect and operate the park, but another half of the agency also regulates mining. And when they're faced with this conflict, they really didn't know what to do from our perspective, and they were silent when, this is in LaSalle County, when LaSalle County was considering whether or not to allow the sand mine to open. They didn't speak to the impacts on the park because they were worried it would be a conflict of interest when they had their regulator hat on to consider the mining permit. So the mining permit has been granted. The Sierra Club and other conservation organizations have gone to court, and we're awaiting the court proceedings on the permit. But this has really not only been drawn our attention to the threat to the park itself, but this is undoubtedly a scenario that's likely to repeat itself as we see a lot more demand for this frack sand, not only for fracking in Illinois, but this sand apparently is valuable enough that it's actually being exported even overseas. So, a lot of concerns from neighbors also about the chemicals that are involved. They have to store a lot of chemicals on site. People are worried about these being stored outdoors next to where they live. Once the operation is ready to go, that's what one looks like in Ohio. We need a facility to process the gas because it doesn't come out of the earth in a way that we can burn it immediately. It has to be treated so that it can be upgraded to pipeline standards. So these are some of the things that we are concerned about in terms of our experiences, what we've heard from other states. Talked about the chemicals. As I said, these really are not used to break up the formations, but to keep the pipelines running free. And unfortunately, it's a pretty long list of, in some cases, some pretty toxic chemicals that have been used in other states for this purpose. We have a lot of petroleum distillates, a lot of things that produce volatile organic chemicals when they evaporate. Things that are either known or potential carcinogens are on this list and the second page. And a lot of times in a lot of states, people don't really know what chemicals are being used, and different competing companies that are drilling for the gas have kind of custom blends, and they're claiming that this is sort of a trade secret, and they don't want to share exactly what chemicals they're using, which makes it really difficult if a neighbor finds drinking water contamination to know, right, if it's from a particular well or not, if you don't really know what a given drilling operation is using. I had concerns from New York State, where this has been happening for a while, about the implications for the aquifer there. One of the things that makes this come front and center to state policymakers is that, unlike a lot of industrial impacts on the environment, we really cannot look, unfortunately, to our federal government and the experts at US EPA and other agencies to take care of these problems, because there have been a series of not only court decisions but congressional actions that have taken away oversight over these industries. This is a little bit of the regulatory evolution, some key milestones in history, but the most important one was during the Bush administration. We had as part of a broad, not just dealing with natural gas, but dealing with energy policy in general in the country, Vice President Cheney assembled a task force. It was not a public body, but a lot of recommendations on a lot of different aspects of the energy sector. And one thing that they recommended that unfortunately Congress did adopt in 2005 were some wholesale exemptions for the natural gas industry from some of our most important environmental laws, from the Safe Drinking Water Act, from some of our toxic waste laws, and from the Clean Water Act. If that hadn't happened, then a lot of the horror stories that we're seeing in other states really would not be allowed, and the US EPA would be able to step in and address them just like they would with any other industry. But their hands really are very much tied as a result of that loophole. And so we worry a lot in particular about the water emissions and also the air emissions. There are a couple of different pathways we worry about how the chemicals associated with fracking might end up into our water supply. Obviously, to get to the gas formations deep in the earth, they have to go, in most cases, directly through an aquifer that's often used as a water supply source. This is why it's so important that we make sure that these wells are cased adequately, that they're inspected, and that they're built to very rigorous standards. If these wells are leaky, they're carrying some very dangerous materials down and up right through our water supply. So if we can make sure that these wells are built correctly and that they're maintained over time and inspected, then perhaps we can deal with this threat. But you do have, in some situations, the concern about these vertical fractures in the rock formations that in some parts of the country have been suspected of leaking upwards. So this stuff goes down under pressure, and if you have a vertical fracture that can reach back up to the aquifer, there might be more than one way up, back up the well, for these chemicals. It's a very real concern. Concern that we can see a lot easier is the threat to surface water. So what goes down must come back up, and when this stuff is put into these pits on the surface, it has the potential to either leak from a leaky pit into the aquifer, or in a rain event or a flood, to be washed away. The separation between the drinking water and the gas tends to vary in different formations of the country. So you can see here that in some cases, particularly in the south central part of the country, a lot of separation. In our New Albany shale in Illinois, not so much. So that suggests there might be a greater likelihood that some of those naturally occurring vertical fractures in the formation could be a pathway for toxins to make its way into the water supply. That's what one of these open pits look like. So what happens to the water once it comes back out the well? It has these chemicals in it, has some of the byproducts of the gas. And a lot of times this gas is associated with oil. In fact, people think in Illinois it probably is. some of the companies think they may drill for gas and oil may come back up the well. So there could be a lot of things that we're concerned about in these flowback pits. Tanks would give us a little bit more security if we knew at least that the flowback water was contained. Here you see flowback water in not only tanks, but it has an emergency pit around it in the case of a spill. Probably a slightly better situation than an open pit. So there's too much of the water produced for it to sit there and evaporate. So in order to get rid of the wastewater, there are only so many options. What a lot of states are allowing the drillers to do is to take the wastewater in trucks to a local sewage treatment plant. And that really poses a lot of concern because in general, again, these are rural areas, very low capacity treatment plants that are dealing not with generally industrial effluent, they're usually dealing with a low volume of residential wastewater. And those plants really are designed to work at a particular volume, and they also are designed to use biological processes to break down waste so that it can be discharged back into the water system. So when you take, a massive influx of new wastewater that has these toxic chemicals, residues, you have really two potential threats to the operation of a wastewater plant. You can overwhelm the system with just volume, and you can kill the bacteria and the organisms in the treatment system that we count on to make the water safe for discharge. And you can have just either poorly or untreated effluent washing through the treatment plant into the waterway. And you're dealing with both the fracking waste and just the general conventional sewage. There is another way, which is not perfect, but has been used for a long time in this country, and this is deep well injection of hazardous waste. Other industries have been using this for a long time. Theoretically, if you can find a site that is not connected to a drinking water source, if your well is sited and operated correctly and built right, there is some confidence that you can inject these hazardous wastes deep in the earth. But this opens up a whole new area of activity that we need to watch and make sure is going to work. A lot of these wells are old. A lot of them may not have been used for a while. They're not inspected regularly. So if we're going to turn to deep well injection as an alternative to dumping this stuff at the local sewage plant, we really got a lot of work to do, and our government agencies have a lot of work to do to make sure that these facilities are safe. Another view of one of these wastewater impoundments. In addition to the water, there are concerns about air pollution. The VOCs and the petroleum products that are coming back up with the water, those will evaporate once they reach the surface, so people living near them can be exposed to those chemicals. From the well itself, not all the gas is able to be captured, so you do have methane that is escaping. Also not good to breathe, and also a very potent greenhouse gas, much more potent than carbon itself. So that's another concern and something that really cuts into any potential emissions benefits that we might have, for instance, from burning natural gas instead of coal. Another view of what some of these tanks look like. Beyond the direct environmental impacts, there are a lot of impacts on the local infrastructure. Again, often rural area with lightly traveled roads, starting to see lots and lots of truck traffic bringing in raw materials, bringing in and out water on more or less around-the-clock basis. So you have a lot of light, you have a lot of noise going on in what used to be the countryside. So the industry has heard a lot of these concerns, and there are a few things that you'll hear from them that I would just like to speak to. They say they don't use a great deal of water. It's just not true. They use a tremendous amount of water, and in many cases, we don't really know where this water is going to be coming from. And they continue to frack these wells over and over and over again to make sure that they're still producing at a good rate. In Illinois, we hear a lot because we do have a history of oil and gas drilling in these same parts of our state, that fracturing is nothing new, that they've been doing this all along, and what's the big deal? We know how to do this in Illinois. Well, it's technically true that they have, but it's a very different kind of fracturing that high-volume hydraulic fracturing will bring to Illinois. It uses a great deal more water, a lot more chemical input, and very different structure wells than have been used before. And we have an Oil and Gas Act that was written in the 1920s to deal with the type on the left that is just totally unable to deal with the impacts of high-volume hydraulic fracturing. Under the 1920s Oil and Gas Act, the Department of Natural Resources, if you apply for a permit to drill, they have to give it to you in 2 days, and it costs $50. That's really about what we've got now if this industry were to start operating at scale in Illinois. We've had situations in Wyoming was one place where EPA had to tell people to stop drinking their well water because of frack water integration into their water supply. So, here it comes. Again, this is where we're likely to see it at least begin. And so what do we, in the environmental community, want to see happen? Well, does this have to happen at all is obviously the first question that comes to mind, and obviously it would be a lot more comforting if we could simply say, no, this is a really dangerous technology. We don't even understand it very well. But I think it's important to recognize that there is a lot of support for this activity. There are people that are poised to make money directly off leasing themselves. We have a coalition of our state's business community and organized labor just 2 weeks ago that announced a brand new initiative to bring fracking to Illinois for economic development and job creation reasons. There are interests that, including all of us, that have something to win from low energy prices. So I think it's important when we think about the environmental downsides to think about the reasons why, when it comes to Springfield and our policymakers, that people really are not willing, unfortunately, to just say no. It would be a lot easier. So that puts us in the position of having to figure out what kind of safeguards would have to be put into place by the state to make sure that we don't see the kind of messes that have been made in other states made here. And unfortunately, there's no one state that we can look to that's got it right so far. There are a few models on some individual pieces. Ohio may have done something in particular very well, Wyoming. So there's been a lot of work over the last year and a half to try to look for best practices on all these different areas of impacts and figure out how we can write the toughest set of safeguards in the country. We know for sure that if people are going to be putting chemicals down into the earth under Illinois, that we need to know exactly what those chemicals are so that we know. We also can take some steps, I believe, to ban some of the most toxic chemicals. There are a growing amount of alternatives to some of the chemicals in use, and Illinois should be asking for the least toxic and the most protective chemicals possible, and we should know exactly what they are. I think that we have to know that those well casings are going to be well built, they're going to be built by professionals, they're going to be inspected regularly if we're going to have any hope of not causing direct aquifer contamination. Unfortunately, we're in the position of doing a lot of the work that we could normally count on the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency to do by closing a lot of the loopholes to those federal laws. So, for instance, we would like to see no use of these open pits in Illinois. If there's going to be wastewater coming out of fracking wells, we really want to see it put into tanks where it can't get into surface water or groundwater. We don't want to see this stuff disposed of in our wastewater treatment plants for reasons I discussed earlier. If we're going to have it go treated as hazardous waste in injection wells, then we're going to need to take a whole new look at our regulatory regime for looking at hazardous waste injection wells. And then I think that given the nature of where fracking is likely to occur, which are some of the most beautiful parts of our state, and where the sand is likely to come from, we're really recommending that the state do some planning to avoid conflicts like the one at Starved Rock. There's no reason why we can't take a look at a map of where the sand is, of where the gas is, and take a look at where are our state parks, where are our highest quality forests and wetlands and prairies, and see conflicts like the one at Starved Rock coming before they begin and take some steps to avoid those conflicts. Maybe there are key parcels that we're going to need to add to our state park system. Maybe we are going to need, I think, some upgrades in the way the Department of Natural Resources deals with these conflicts of regulator versus natural resource manager. We certainly don't want to see this activity in our state parks or adjacent to it. And then finally, I think that we need to acknowledge that whatever we would come up with in 2013 maybe, hopefully, would be the strongest program in the country today, but it wouldn't be for very long. This is a fairly new industry. There's a lot of innovation occurring, and we would want our safeguards to constantly reflect the best practices, the least toxic, the least water-intensive methods available to the industry. US EPA is not able to do much in terms of regulating, but Congress has charged them with doing a major national health study on fracking that's due out next year. We should automatically reopen anything that's in place before 2014 when that study comes out so that we can adopt or at least consider any recommendations that they'll have to make the process safer, less dangerous. So at the moment, this is a very hot topic in Springfield. We have, last year, we had our state Senate passed a bill that we supported on a very narrow portion of this, simply dealing with chemical disclosure, making companies tell us what chemicals they're using, and adopting strong well casing standards. That was it. It was not a comprehensive bill at all, but on those two topics, it was a pretty strong measure. Then the House, Illinois House, introduced a moratorium for 2 years. And we supported that. We worked hard for that for the last 6 months of last year. Earned a fair amount of support for it. In the Illinois House, there's 118 members. You need 60 votes to pass a bill. I think we had about 40 votes for it at the end of last year. Then these negotiations kind of kicked into high gear, and there's been some very intensive discussions going on with a number of legislators that have taken an interest in this. Our Attorney General has really been fighting very hard for a lot of these protections in particular, and we are eagerly awaiting to see what comes out of this process. Maybe this week we may see a proposal, and the last slide, some of the things I talked about that we needed to see, that's going to be kind of the scale by which we'll judge a bill and whether or not it is protective enough. The moratorium has also been reintroduced into the state Senate. That essentially is a 2-year moratorium. During that 2 years, a task force would be appointed to look into a lot of these problems and make recommendations. There are some things pending at the federal level, the first two in Congress, which is difficult because we really don't see a path for legislation to regulate the industry passing in the U.S. House. But there is one small piece, though, of air pollution regulation which the EPA is not prohibited from doing, which they are working on. So, this is our national website to track the progress of some of these both federal and state activities. SierraClub.org/natural gas is where a lot of these materials will be hosted. If you're taking notes, if you're here for class, these are my some of the references for this, but I don't think it's a little late for those, I think. And this is some contact information and how to reach me. So I wanted to stop there. We've got a really compelling video. But before that, if people had questions about the things that I've talked about before we hear from Sandra Steingraber's video, then I think we can take those now. Yes?
Can any of this wastewater be recycled and used
Yes.
for more fracking?
Can the wastewater be recycled? Yes, it can. My understanding is within limits. There are some qualities of the water they need to be able to do what they need it to do, which is to travel great distances at pressure, but there is some capacity to reuse the water. That obviously would lessen the waste disposed, and that would lessen some of the water supply impacts as well. So anything the state can do to make the water be handled carefully, and that includes whether or not we charge for the water. Right now, high volume withdrawals of water in Illinois are free. Charging a fee for a public resource like water might be a way that not only that revenue could be generated to actually do these regulations, but could encourage people to recycle it. I think that would be a smart thing to include as well. Yes?
Struggling to formulate the question. These open pools.
Yes.
The open pools that exist, have any of these sites closed, and what has happened with those pools? And the reason I'm asking this is that list of chemicals you had up there had many VOCs, poisons. There's some poisonous gases coming off them, hydrogen
Right.
sulfide. I'm curious if any of these sites have closed and what has happened to those open pools. Do they become another EPA reclamation site?
I'm not aware that the industry, this technique is new enough that I'm not aware that there's been large-scale closure. There may be some that I'm not aware of. I will say that another detail that we're requesting is that when these sites are remediated, that there is some testing. First of all, there's some baseline testing before drilling even starts, so we know whether there's contamination in the water and the soil to begin with, so we can go back and have a record if the contamination came from the fracturing. But we also would like to see the sites remediated with topsoil with native vegetation once they're clean. Yes?
You said that a well can be fracked more than once. What's the lifetime? What is the lifetime of a well, and how long, it's fracked for how long? And then once it's been fracked, I suppose it's gas is taken out. And
Right.
then, how long will that happen before they frack it again? And then how many times can they do this, or how long will the well last altogether?
It's a great question. I think it varies a lot. I mean, these are sort of connected underground systems, right? So if you can imagine relieving pressure in one area, there's probably some general pressure relief from surrounding areas coming to contribute more gas to the formation. In general, the rule of thumb that I've heard is that these individual wells can be fracked a number of times, 8, 10, 12 times, over the course of maybe a 20-year lifetime per well. But I think...
How long does it take to frack?
Sorry?
How long does it take to frack?
How long does it take to frack? I think it happens pretty quickly, but I actually don't know the answer to that question.
You had a slide. I think it said 1 to 2 weeks. A couple of weeks.
I should read my own slide.
I've got one.
And I think that it varies a lot also with what you find down there, right? In Illinois, we in the industry think that there is recoverable gas there, but they really don't know until production wells are drilled. And a lot of times this stuff will happen in association with oil deposits as well, and so it's highly variable. Yes.
Thank you for your presentation. I had a question and a little bit of curiosity. With the open pits, the state-level fire marshals often have jurisdiction over underground storage tanks.
Yes.
And has that been investigated to see if those open pits could be defined as underground storage tanks?
I know they're not currently subject to the fire marshal jurisdiction, but it's a good suggestion because I think that although there'll be a lot of water in these, I don't know whether the concentration of the VOCs and the petroleum products would rise to the level of flammability, but it's a good suggestion.
Again, thank you for your presentation. My question is about what the corporate interests are that would benefit from bringing fracking into Illinois. Can you address, if you know off the top of your head, what the major corporations are that would be benefiting from this?
I think a lot of the big oil companies have natural gas exploration arms. I think ExxonMobil is particularly among the big oil companies, is the biggest in terms of the commodity companies. Halliburton and their subsidiaries are the biggest, the market dominator of the drilling services and getting the gas to market. So those are probably the two biggest companies.
Thank you. My question was when an aquifer is contaminated, I know that there have been wells, particularly in the East Coast, the Pennsylvania area, where the water is no longer drinkable. How localized does that tend to be? Does it tend to spread throughout the aquifer, or does it tend to stay fairly localized?
Depends on the aquifer, but some of these aquifers are very large. I mean, the aquifer that we're on top of right now covers into southern Wisconsin and much of the northern part of Illinois. So it's a very, very difficult thing to do to isolate and remediate aquifer contamination. So it's really a situation that you want to avoid at all costs, and that's really what most of these safeguards are intended to try to do, because you really have to prepare for not being able to use the aquifer as a drinking water supply anymore once that happens.
Is there any research to date on how far it has traveled?
I think it would be very dependent on the local, on the aquifer in question. And these aquifers have flow rates too. Some of them move quite a bit underground, some of them not so much. It'd be extremely site-specific answer to that.
Hi. I was wondering, what can we do besides staying informed as members in McHenry County?
Sure. Well, at the moment, because we haven't seen a proposal that would give us the kind of safeguards that we need at a minimum, the only piece of legislation today that we have is the Senate Bill 1418, which is the moratorium. I think we'll probably see a version of that in the Illinois House as well, but we really need to keep an eye on what's coming out of this process. So I guess and I think it'll be a matter of days or weeks and not months until we see whether or not this is going to be protective. I think it's also important to realize that we all use natural gas, right? So we are all contributing to the demand for this practice and this product. So I think that any time that we conserve energy, that we look at the natural gas consumption in our lives, that's how we relate to the natural gas industry directly every day. So I think being in a 62-degree auditorium tonight, we're doing something to reduce our reliance on the problem. But it is important to realize that we are consumers of the product as well.
Here's a question.
Yes.
With that in mind, has anybody that you know of done a life cycle assessment on the impact of, say, a BTU of natural gas versus a BTU from coal versus nuclear?
Could you repeat that?
Has anybody done a life cycle assessment of the emissions profile with natural gas versus coal?
Impact, ecotoxicity, energy impact.
I would probably, what I have seen are the greenhouse gas implications. And natural gas, conventional natural gas definitely comes out a winner versus coal in terms of greenhouse gas emissions.
Even when you take all those other
when it comes to fracked gas, it really comes to what assumptions you want to use for leakage. How much of that methane, which is many times more powerful greenhouse gas than carbon, how much of that gas are we assuming is escaping from the well? At some higher leakage rates, it can really substantially eat into the greenhouse gas benefits of natural gas. So that's why we think that efforts to capture methane, which are preferable, or at the very least to flare it off, help on that balance.
We've got one here.
Real quick, in regards to the contamination matter you had mentioned, for example, when soil is contaminated, it's pretty much done. It's spent.
Right.
Soil is pretty much damaged goods for the most part. As far as jobs, are we entering somewhat of an era, for example, the miners that know the risks, that are susceptible to the ailments later on in life? Is that what's going to be happening? And if so, how long do you anticipate the funding for this fracking process to continue? Because you have state and federal agencies that are involved. I'm guessing Bureau of Land Management, the various states, et cetera?
Yeah. Well, I think with regard to the health impacts, there are real health impacts if proper precautions aren't taken for the workers. I think that particularly on the sand, we've definitely seen some respiratory impacts from silica dust inhalation from workers in sand mines. In terms of the revenue and the economic incentive for fracking to continue is a little bit unknown. It probably depends on whether or not we are aggressively developing other resources that could take its place. Currently in Illinois, for instance, we're on a path to get 25% of our energy, our electricity, from renewable sources. We're at 7% currently, whereas we were at 0 just 6 years ago. So we need that ramp up to continue as fast as we possibly can. But unfortunately, we have to face the prospect of this material also being exported. There's so much of this exploration going on in the country now that there are serious conversations about not just using it for our own purposes. For decades we've been talking about trying to become energy independent so that we're not reliant on other countries. And now this abundance of natural gas has people talking about trying to build export terminals, because you can compress this into a liquid and put it on tankers and send it around the world. And so we really need to, we may very well take care of our own energy needs in other ways and still face the prospect of this activity happening. So it's difficult to say how long-term a phenomenon is. I think we should prepare for it to be at least a threat as long as the gas is there.
Questions now? And Jack, you'll be available after?
I will. Thanks.